Viewers, historic and high-stakes diplomacy is unfolding in Islamabad, where the US and Iran have begun their face-to-face first direct ceasefire talks since 1979 Islamic Revolution. Leading the American delegation is Vice President J.D. Vance, who has already held key meetings with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Ahead of negotiations, Iran's top leadership is also present there, including Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher, Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas, Araghchi, signaling the seriousness of these talks. The White House has confirmed that both sides have now met directly, marking a significant diplomatic breakthrough. And in another significant development, high-level talks between the US and Iran are showing early signs of progress, with sources describing the atmosphere as positive. And according to Al Jazeera, the initial discussions lasted nearly 2 hours and addressed some of the most critical sticking points in the ongoing conflict. Initial breakthroughs are being reported, particularly on the situation in Lebanon. There are indications that Israeli military operations could be limited to southern regions, with no further strikes on Beirut, although official confirmation is still awaited. However, even as discussions begin on a relatively cautious note, US President Trump is casting a long shadow over the process. His strong social media remarks dismissing claims of Iran gaining ground are reportedly adding tension to the negotiations and complicating efforts on the ground. With global attention now fixed on Islamabad, the outcome of these talks could determine the future of the fragile ceasefire and possibly reshape the trajectory of the ongoing conflict. And to help us read between the lines, we have Ambassador Veena Sikri, former Indian diplomat. We have Vail Awad, strategic expert. We have Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, defense expert. A very good evening to you. And Ambassador Veena Sikri, my first question is to you. How do you look at the diplomatic engagement? This is the first, direct talks that are being held between US and Iran. It's a historic moment. How do you see this?
Yes, it is historic because after 1979, they have not had these direct talks before. But as far as the substance of the talk is concerned, we do know that on the 26th of February, 6 weeks ago, they were having similar talks mediated by the Foreign Minister of Oman. And at that time, he had described the talks as yielding a breakthrough in the sense that Iran had agreed to never have a nuclear weapon. They had agreed to give up on enriched uranium. And still, despite the breakthrough that the Foreign Minister of Oman was describing, the attacks took place on Iran on 28th of February by Israel and USA, and of course the rest is history, as they say. So now in Pakistan, in Islamabad, I think the talks have been very carefully brought together because we do know that the ceasefire, the Iran-Israel USA ceasefire, took place just minutes before President Trump's promise to obliterate Iran was there. Just that deadline was just missed by a few minutes. And since then, there's been every effort to do it. But we see that, and as of this afternoon, we did see Pakistan saying that we're going to try for direct talks. We're going to try for direct talks. And the way that Pakistan's role has been very carefully orchestrated, they have been their role has been very carefully choreographed. It became clear that it is America which is ready now for direct talks, and that J.D. Vance, before he leaves Islamabad, will want to have one meeting, at least direct meeting with his Iranian counterpart, to see what the contours of a deal could be. But if we look at the issues now on the what are the problems, the sticking points, one is of course Lebanon. And here in Lebanon, the misunderstanding was caused because Pakistan gave one document to the Americans, which did not include Lebanon in the countries where the ceasefire would be observed, and the other document to Iran, which included Lebanon in the countries of the ceasefire. And since then, there's been this huge problem with the Iranian delegation. They almost didn't go to Islamabad, and then they did, I think, with some gentle persuasion, possibly from China. And now this talk of having a zone in southern Lebanon where Israel will continue to attack, I don't know whether Iran will accept this or not, because this is actually going to then become that same buffer zone that Israel has always asked for with Lebanon, and then that buffer zone will ultimately become a part of Israel. So I think this is one of the big problems, and whether Iran is going to accept that or whether they will insist on a ceasefire which covers all of Lebanon and not just. And then on their part, they should give some assurances. I think that Hezbollah will not be, targeting Israel or anything like that. So that's one issue. The second, of course, much more complex issue is the Strait of Hormuz, which is an issue was not there at all when the war began on the 28th of February, but which now has become absolutely critical because of the Iranian insistence that they retain some kind of control, and they're drawing parallels with the Suez Canal, with the Panama Canal, and so on. It's very complex, and today we do know, as you said, from the various tweets that President Trump has been making, that there was an indication that an American warship is going to enter the Strait of Hormuz. But then, as is being shown now, that this ship turned back after Iran gave a threat. So this is, of course, a development which means that Iran is very serious about controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and that uh, they are not going to give in on this one. I think this is another very big point because, of course, all the Gulf states are also interested, whether it is UAE, whether it is Qatar, whether it is Kuwait, Bahrain, and others. They're all very interested in this. It's a very, very major aspect. And I think the issue about the frozen assets is very important because in the morning it seemed it was going to be allowed, the frozen assets were going to be released, and in fact the governor of the Central Bank of Iran is in the delegation. He is in Islamabad, and the understanding was that perhaps to discuss how the frozen assets would be released. But now this has been a moving back on this, but maybe it's going to be part of the bigger bargain. So we hope still that there will be some movement on this stage as well. The question is that when will the direct talks start? There's no indication yet whether the direct talks have already been held or it's being planned for tomorrow, because in the evening they were saying so far that it's a trilateral. That means in the sense that all three are in the room: Pakistan, Pakistan, Iran, and USA. So whether there's going to be a separate bilateral dialogue between Iran and USA where they can talk directly, this is yet to be seen.
That's right, Ambassador, and trilateral talks, face-to-face talks have already begun. Now, Dr. Awad, so from a West Asia POV, are these talks driven by, battlefield fatigue or, geopolitical pressure from global powers? Because apart from, the main stakeholders, Pakistan, US, and Iran, there are, members, delegation from third countries as well.
Well, I think both the questions you raised is both the answer to your questions, because it is actually the global pressure, the regional pressure, and the war fatigue that the United States exhausted its all strategic military assets to end the Iranian government, but they failed in all the fields, including the Israeli side. They were unable to change the regime. They were unable to cause a revolt against the government. And Iran stood its own ground and has made the American come to the negotiating table and to discuss the 10-point they have raised to the American as much as the American raised the 15-point. So I believe that this talk is already, because the United States and Israel are under tremendous pressure, especially the president of the US, who is already losing his credibility and popularity among his own people in the United States, and also internationally, where he become more isolated. So the speak of the Strait of Hormuz at this stage is nothing but a rhetoric from him to gain back the American dignity or respect globally, that he made America lose it, and he has been criticized for that. So therefore, I think this was unnecessary war for the United States, which has imposed on them because of Netanyahu, who dragged the United States president into this war. We all know that he became the Trumpstein, and we have seen all the development that he was blackmailed and he dragged into it. Having said that, I would say that is for the regional gain of Israel, because for Israel, objective is different from the United States, but maybe they meet at one point that both agrees that terminating a regional power, but they forgot that it is Iran a force to reckon with. So they were unable to do that. So now, when the United States failed internationally to rally behind her, even their own NATO allies, to bring them into the Strait of Hormuz or into this war, now he is trying to bring the rest of the world that he is releasing or freeing the Strait of Hormuz from the Iranian captivity. I think this is nothing but merely to, as I said, to get the popularity more again. I think the Iranian have the upper hand at the moment. They have the land, they have the history, their resilience, and they will continue to fight, despite the fact that the Americans have built up enough wars and they have sent the warship into the Strait of Hormuz. They sent the warship into the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, trying to capture all the corridors of the global trade, because that is the ultimatum or the global war that the United States is fighting to be at the door of China, the next step.
And Dr. Awad, they've always, held Hormuz as leverage, and even now, the priority may be to, ease the movement in Hormuz Strait. But Iran has clearly made it, very important that Lebanon should also be included in the ceasefire. General Kocher, what does, from a military standpoint, what does limiting strikes to southern Lebanon mean? Does it really mean that, let's keep the pot boiling, but not immediate or not complete, winding down of hostilities, right?
From a military point of view, it means nothing, actually. Because you see, go back into history, 2006 war, Lebanon war, and if you see that blue line, how the blue line actually came up into being. And UNIFIL was incorporated into that entire thing, and UNIFIL was tasked. It was one of the tasks of the United Nations, this force here, to ensure the sanctity of this blue line and south of blue line onto this Lebanese and the Israeli border. This area was a no-go for the Hezbollahs. They were not permitted to get inside this area. It was only the Lebanon army and the United Nations peacekeeping force. Nobody else was allowed to be in this area. But what has happened? Over a period of time, the UNIFIL has not been able to control the movement of Hezbollah into this area. And most of the villages here, which are occupied, have been employed by the Hezbollahs as their own bases here. They have gone underground here, and they have their missile launchers, and at any point of time, they are targeting critical command, control, and logistic infrastructure of Israel, especially the Haifa port. So Israel is very, very sensitive to this kind of activity, and that is why, if you remember, when Assad was removed, at that point of time, there was a disarray in Syria, and IDF took advantage of that confusion and expanded the Golan Heights almost 40 kilometers inside Syria, and they went up to Mount Hermon, which is just 30-40 kilometers from Damascus, and they were able to dominate by height, and especially these areas now what we are talking about South Lebanon, because they have their artillery guns deployed there on the mountains and all, and they can bring fire on this area from Syrian side. A second important aspect which took place was that the logistic routes of Hezbollah were from Iraq. They were coming from South Lebanon and along this route. So, by occupying these areas, the logistics from where the ammunition was coming, missiles was coming to Hezbollah from Iran, it came to Iraq, and the Shia militia was there in Iraq, which was supporting them, and this route was blocked. So now I think Israel is sensing an opportunity, because if you remember that Pager's attack took place some time back, and their top leadership was decimated, and now they are looking for an opportunity to finish off Hezbollah, because Hamas is practically over. Houthis also are not so active as of today. So this is the only potent force which is left with Iran. And that is why Israel does not want to compromise. And one more important factor is that Netanyahu doesn't want to face an election. You see, all this is, it is also political, from a military point of view. I've explained to you, but from a political point of view also, why Netanyahu wants to keep the pot boiling is because he doesn't, you see, all these corruption cases. I believe next week there is a hearing also on his corruption cases, and it's a close and a shut case as far as I have come to know about it. So I feel that Netanyahu wants to keep this thing, simmering, and that is why he is now saying that I will restrict the area. For what? Because either it is a ceasefire or it is a war. So you can't have uh, a limited area that you will be targeting, and you will be capturing, because your intention is very clear. That means you want to keep it on, and you don't want to face your own people for elections, because now you know that America wants to exit, and Netanyahu has absolutely nothing, absolutely no options now left, that he will have to stop firing at Iran. And therefore, I think